Welcome everybody to Northwestern's career panel discussion. This is the 6th year that we're running this, and we are recording it, and it will be live on YouTube. My name's Aaron Geller. I'm the director of the program here. I'm also joined by Cliff Johnson, who is the co-director this year. Cliff, you wanted to say hi so you pop up on screen?
Hello, I'm Cliff. Happy you all could make it.
Thank you, Cliff. Cliff and I have been doing our best to run this program remotely this summer. It's been a little different, and but as a plus side, I think we have more people joining us remotely than we have in the past. So this is great. And I'm not going to take a lot of time with the introduction, but I just want to kind of set the stage a little bit for everybody. We have panelists who I'll introduce in just a moment who are going to tell us about a variety of career paths. All of them went through physics or astronomy education and have come out in different places. And the reason why I think this is so important for us to discuss is because I want all of the students to know that there are a lot of opportunities available. So your advisor, your research advisor that you're working with over the summer in the REU probably knows a lot about the path that takes you from undergrad to grad school, PhD, onto faculty position, and maybe some stuff in between. That is one path, and we'll talk about that a bit today, but that's not the only path. There are lots of different choices, and actually a lot of choices that you can get to even after grad school. So there are choices after undergrad. There are some choices that you can that open up again after grad school. And just by the statistics, it is true that we all the undergrads, and if there's any grad students watching, there aren't enough faculty positions to go around. So that is just a reality of the situation. It is a very valid hope to have if that is what you love. You love doing research, you want to teach, be faculty. But just so you know, if you really like research, there are other jobs that allow you to do research. You don't have to go into being a faculty member, a professor. And that's kind of what we're going to explore today, is of some of the different opportunities that are out there for you all. And they are all really super interesting, and they all allow you to apply your problem-solving skills. And this will help you identify what might be right for you as you're looking into the future. Okay, so with that, let me introduce our panelists. I'm just going to briefly say their names and titles, and then I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So I'm going to start alphabetically by last name. We have Patti Carroll with us, who's a senior data scientist for sustainability at the Climate Corporation. We have Alex Hayes, who's an associate professor of astronomy and the director of the Cornell Center for Astrophysics and Planetary Science. We have Nick Hunt-Walker, who's a senior software engineer at Verica. We have Danielle Nielsen, who's a principal data scientist at Capital One. Now I want to let all of our panelists actually do a little better job introducing themselves. I want to ask all of our panelists to tell us about your path that led you to this career. Maybe tell us a little bit about this career. And if you have any advice that you want to give to our students right now, that would be a perfect time to do it. Let's start going again in alphabetical order. So Patti, do you want to go first?
Of course. Thanks for the brief introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Patti Carroll. I live in Seattle area, actually, and I work for the Climate Corporation. Senior, actually, I forgot to update my title. I was just promoted, yay me. I'm a lead data scientist now at the Climate Corporation, specifically working on sustainability. This is an agriculture technology company. So my job right now encompasses identifying ways to use big data, a lot of data that we're collecting through sensors on farms from equipment, and using satellite imagery and publicly available data to help farmers make more sustainable decisions and make the agricultural system more sustainable, and reducing impact on the environment, and even finding opportunities to remove carbon from the atmosphere as a solution for climate change. My career path, if I had to say when it started, I would take it back to my undergraduate years. I was studying physics at Siena College in upstate New York, which is also where I grew up, in upstate New York. I started to learn to code as an undergraduate for, I think, my first REU. It was an REU at Museum of Natural History in New York City. And I couldn't even tell you now, I was so fresh and new to astronomy at the time, hadn't studied astronomy. I couldn't even tell you exactly what I was working on that summer. But I know like that's when I started to learn to program. And that's what I would identify as kind of the start of my data science career, because I developed a real love for programming and solving problems computationally over the years. So I did another RU the following summer in planetary science at JPL and decided that I wanted to concentrate on astronomy. Really loved the field, loved the application of programming to solve scientific questions, and joined the University of Washington PhD program in 2009. So around that time, data science was actually becoming a thing, starting to become this new career path, this sexy new job. And Seattle was a good place to be during that time. A few years into my PhD program, I had the opportunity to take a class called Statistics and Machine Learning for Astronomy. And that was my introduction to machine learning, which I thought was so cool. And I was excited about this new potential career opportunity, knowing that people with PhDs in quantitative disciplines were being sought after for this new job title called data science. And I also really loved Seattle, still live here, and wasn't sure that kind of long-term a professor track was really what I wanted. So that's kind of when I decided that I wanted to tune what I was doing in my research to set myself up for that career transition. And I also delayed my graduation a little bit by spending a summer on Google Summer Code program, which really helped me develop really solid software engineering development skills. And then in 2016, after finishing my PhD, applied, was on the job market for a bit, and got my first job at the Climate Corporation almost 4 years ago. And the rest is history. I've been in a couple of different roles at Climate, all kind of related to agriculture and improving productivity and sustainability. In terms of advice, I don't have any, I feel like everybody has different questions, and it's so dependent on what your interests are that I'd rather kind of offer advice as those questions kind of come in later.
Great, thank you so much, Patti. Let's move on to Alex Hayes.
Sure. Hey guys, I'm Alex. Right now I'm an associate professor of astronomy at Cornell, and as Aaron said, I'm also director of the Cornell Center for Astrophysics and Planetary Science, which is a soft money research arm of the department where a lot of researchers actually propose for grants and can work doing research without teaching classes. Perhaps more importantly, I'm also the co-director of our REU program at Cornell. And so I'm really happy to talk with you guys and see everybody here. My research is predominantly focused around solar system exploration. I really enjoy working with large teams of scientists and engineers to propose, develop, launch, and operate NASA's fleet of planetary science missions, like the Mars 2020 rover sitting behind me that successfully launched yesterday. And the way I got here was through effectively REU and undergraduate research. So when I was in high school, I contacted various professors at the schools I was looking at and figured out which one would let me do research with them. And that's ultimately why I went to Cornell as an undergraduate, and I participated in their REU program after my first year and got my feet wet working in planetary science on what eventually would become the Mars Exploration Rovers. It was a different name and a different proposal at the time. But I spent all 4 years of my undergraduate doing research in various groups at Cornell focused primarily on solar system exploration. But at the end of that experience, I really didn't know if I wanted to be a scientist or an engineer. I really enjoyed working with both. I liked the science, but I also loved the robotics of building the instruments and operating them. So what I did, which is one of the pieces of advice I would give, is I didn't go straight to grad school. I stuck around Cornell for another year or semester to get a professional master's degree, and I went into industry for a number of years working at a place called Lincoln Laboratory, which is in Boston. It's on Hanscom Air Force Base, and there I saw what it was to be in industry working as an engineer, and I absolutely loved my work at Lincoln Laboratory. I can tell you more about it if people have questions, and I could see myself having stayed there happily for a large number of years. I should point out that before I went to Lincoln Laboratory, I actually spent 1 year at Jet Propulsion Laboratory as a spacecraft operator, doing the rover driving and commanding the spacecraft in the first start of that mission. But the time at Lincoln is really where I learned what it was to be an engineer and what industry was like. And it really was quite enjoyable, but ultimately I decided that I missed the exploration of working on these large space missions. So I went back to grad school after a number of years to a small school in California, California Institute of Technology. There I worked between Caltech and JPL and got my PhD. Then I did a postdoctoral position at the Miller Institute up at UC Berkeley before coming back to Cornell to join the faculty. And that was my path. But the main points in there being that I wanted to wait and take that gap of a few years to really decide if I wanted to go the science path or the engineering path, if I really wanted to go towards the faculty academic route or stay in industry, which would have been just fine and very exciting as well. And I will tell you, to probably the hour before I had to make my decision, I was weighing the difference between grad school as an engineer and grad school as a scientist. I had applied to both and I had to choose. Ultimately, I chose science, but it could have very easily gone the other way. So I'm happy to talk to you guys about the different paths you can take with an astronomy or a physics background that really can lead to places in addition to academia, places like JPL working on engineering of robots, or places like Lincoln Laboratory where you're mainly working for Air Force and Department of Defense projects.
Great, thank you very much, Alex. And next up, Nick Hunt-Walker.
Hey, so I'm Nick. I became fascinated in astronomy like 2006, 2007. I think I actually made the switch over to doing physics and astronomy in 2007. But back in 2006, I had taken a class, like an undergrad, like 101 class in astronomy, because I was a business major, and I just wanted like an easy science credit. And I was like, yeah, this looks simple. And it was, honestly, the astronomy class was simple, but it made me feel things. So I was like, I could keep doing accounting, or I could actually do something that made me feel things. And so I kept going with that. And so that's when I left. I was at community college then in Queens, New York. And I left community college to transfer to a four-year school and get my physics and math degree. And during that time, I didn't do much astronomy research besides RUs. But I did do an RU at the Museum of Natural History. I did one at Wisconsin. And I also did kind of an RU, not RU, at the Museum of, the Smithsonian Museum of Space Museum in DC. I forget what it's called now. It's the National something. I don't know. Someone else knows it. Air and Space. There it is. And in that one, I did a lot of outreach, talking to people about astronomy and space stuff, and just kind of like doing a lot of public outreach work. The other two were far more research heavy, and in those is where I did most of my like astronomy work and astronomy coding. But it was like in IDL, and I thank the stars every day that I never have to touch IDL ever again. Because it's awful. But I did that there. And for my last year of undergrad, I was able to transfer to Columbia to participate in one of the first iterations of their post-baccalaureate program in astronomy. So I was able to finish out my undergrad there and then do a semester there just as a post-bac student. Looking at like neutron stars and not neutron stars. I was looking at pulsars, trying to find pulsars in gamma ray data from the newly minted Fermi. Is it even called Fermi anymore? At the time, it was the Fermi Gamma Ray Observatory, and I was terrible at it. It was awful. It's you really should pay attention when things are slow and when they hurt, because I spent so much time trying to do a Lohm-Scargill periodogram, way more time than was really necessary. And like a year later, I was able to do it in like 5 minutes. I spent months on this, trying to like in Fortran 77, trying to pull this data and build a periodogram. Yeah. It's like that. It hurt. It hurt every day. And then like Python and like, oh, simple. But I did my post-bac there, and then I moved on to a grad program at University of Washington in Seattle, where I met Cliff and Patti. They were a year ahead of me. And yeah, so I studied galactic structure and asymptotic giant branch stars for a few years. I learned Python in 2012 just like to do homework and research, and that's just kind of been my favorite language since. But you know, it's funny when you're an astronomer, especially during that time. As Patti said, like data science started becoming the hot thing. We had a couple people who were like postdocs who went off into data science, and we had Jake van der Plas, who is an amazing human being in every capacity, honestly, and he was like the first of the grad students to really like go off and do data science heavy. And it was like, oh, I want to be like him. And so I started like building up my chops in data science for a couple years. And then I discovered web development because my brother did web development and was able to like shoot me work and get me paid, because being a grad student is poverty. It's poverty level. It's awful. And so I would like wake up at 6 a.m. every day, and then I'd study web development stuff, and then I'd go to school at like 10 and TA or do research, and then go home and just do more studying and try to build up my web development chops over about 4 months of time. And then he started actually shooting me work. And as I did more web development work, I realized I really liked it a lot. I like the creative aspect of it. I like to be able to do stuff that people would actually use and be interested in and would influence their lives in some significant way. And so about a year and a half later, I was kind of like, I had come to a point where I felt miserable as a grad student, and I knew I didn't want to continue. I didn't know what to do next though, and I had some opportunities on the table. It seemed that the natural next step was data science, but I also liked web development, so I applied for jobs in both. And a few months after that, I actually had 2 offers on the table at the same time, one for data science, one for web development. Well, actually to teach web development. And the web development one wanted me to say yes first, so I said I did. And now I'm a web developer. And I've been that way for about 4.5 years. But yeah, it was really just, it was out of need. I learned to love web development, and then I learned to be good at teaching it. After I left grad school, I did not get my PhD, so shame upon my head. Yeah. I started teaching for a company called Code Fellows here in Seattle for 2 years. I was their lead Python instructor, and I was able to like basically refactor their whole Python program and teach hundreds of students in my time there. And then I left. I went to Starbucks. So I was at Starbucks for a year and a half on the emerging technology team, building stuff that was innovative and wasn't necessarily like prioritized by the company, but became priorities for some teams because we could demonstrate their value. It's a lot of like work in just demonstrating value after building a thing. And now I work for a startup called Verica, where I build experiments trying to break Kafka. If anyone knows what Kafka is, distributed systems, and also like helping be like part of the Python leadership here and understand like help other people understand how to write Python well and how to do Python things the Python way. And that's where I am today.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. And next up, Danielle Nielsen.
All right. So it was really interesting to hear the previous 3 people, like your paths, because I actually hear a lot of echoes of my own journey through this. So I started in astronomy after taking a class back in undergrad. I was a physics major at a small college called Colby College, which is where I met Cliff. And then I took a class, and of all the things in physics, it seemed like something I could do. So the professor encouraged me to apply to REUs. So the first one I did was at University of Wisconsin, which is where I met Aaron. And then I did 2 more. I did one at the University of Rochester, and then let's call it due to some academic bookkeeping, I finished up mid-year, but I didn't get my degree until the end of the year. So I was able to sneak in and do the REU at CTIO down in Chile. So I did that, was in Chile for 10 weeks. And while I was there, I had decided to take a gap year before going to grad school. And one of the things that I think is sort of a little consistency of things that I do is I tend to tell people that I'm planning to do things. So I know, like, I wrote it into my application that I was planning to take a gap year, and the director put me with a person who had money to hire somebody for a year. So I, after finishing undergrad, moved down to Chile for a year and worked at CTIO on a Spitzer space project mission. It was around that time, the great thing, and I think that it was the first science research that had resonated with me, because I was working with people that said, well, this is the problem we're trying to solve. Go do it how you want it. And at the very end of my undergrad career, I had started programming in Python. So that was, also I graduated in 2008, which is a terrible time to do anything, which I'm saying now, realizing that we are now in COVID and it's a terrible time. So yeah, so I kind of moving down to Chile for a year seemed like a great option. So I'd started working in Python in 2008. And so although IDL was sort of the thing that everybody was using in astronomy at the time, I was like, I'm gonna do this in Python. And it was exciting and it was fun. And fun fact, Pandas wasn't released until 2008, so I did everything pre-Pandas. Yeah, I saw that face. So that means that I know basic types really, really well, and I know how to parse files like nobody's business. So did that for a year, didn't quite finish everything off, and I managed to, it's sort of independent of everything. I wrote my code with the idea that somebody else was going to use it. The advisor I was working for gave it to another grad student later. She was able to get the code working and learned Python from it. So that's always like one of my proud moments. After that, I went to grad school at University of Wisconsin in Madison, and was there. I ended up. I think I really resonated with the if something is being painful and if you are having difficulty, you should pay attention to it, because chances are you should do something else, pivot. Like, it shouldn't be that way. Like, that's not a good reason to just dig down. But I ended up with doing some work on a project that ended up just having bad data. Whenever people are like, oh, not having data is the worst. No, having bad data is the worst, always the worst. So I ended up just really over time coming to truly hate my PhD. And I hit a point where I had about a year left, like a year of really hard work left that I really didn't want to do. So after talking with my advisor, I decided to leave ABD. I get some letters after my name too, all but dissertation. So I left grad school. I ended up being really lucky to have a free place to live. So I was able to spend a little bit of time decompressing. And I had a couple of friends that had gone into data science. I knew that I was a strong programmer, and those were skills that I had. I knew some things about machine learning, but that wasn't necessarily my strength. So I did some studying up on those libraries, and I I got an interview and got the very first data science job that I applied for. So I took it, and that was at the previous job that I had, which was with a company, an all-state company called Arity. So I was working with a lot of GPS data, and working with mobility information and maps and things like that. I worked with a lot of really great, really smart, really interesting people, did a lot of research, learned a lot. And now, actually it was after we started all of our work from home and all of the shelter in place started, I was interviewed for a new job, and now I work for Capital One. And I'm now in sort of more of a data science software dev hybrid position, where we are maintaining and building the code base that is used for valuations for the credit card business. I guess the overwhelming theme, and I don't know that it necessarily jumps out of here. I ended up being pretty involved in one of the outreach programs at University of Wisconsin, where I gave a lot of talks. I gave at least like 50 public talks. And I was also involved with a program called Software Carpentry, where I actually taught software skills to people. And one of the things, as I sort of look at my career, that one of the things that differentiates me is definitely communication. And I'm comfortable getting up in front of people and talking about things. And when I started grad school, I definitely wasn't there. And when I left grad school, it turns out that's probably been the most valuable skill that I've had. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Danielle. And thanks to all of our panelists. I really appreciate you sharing all of the history of where you are. And I think that it's really interesting to hear everyone's different experiences. And, you know, in particular in grad school, I know this is probably one of the areas that a lot of the undergrads are thinking of as a potential next step. Grad school can be a challenge, as you've heard, and in some cases it's good, and in some cases you will realize that it's maybe not for you if you go into grad school. But the positive side of it is that you still come out with jobs. You know, you still learn skills in grad school. Whether or not you finish with your PhD, that's almost besides the point. You learn some skills that are important to help in a variety of different jobs, as our panelists are showing, have been talking about and will continue to talk about today. Okay, so I want to open this up to questions from our students. And so we can either do it through people talking in Zoom, and if you have a question, use the raise hand button, or write into the chat, and I can read the question for you. So let me just pause for a second to see if anyone wants to raise their hand. I do see, okay, I see a hand raised. I see two hands raised. I'm going to go with a Northwestern person first. Tobin, you want to ask the first question?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. So my question is in particular for Danielle and Nick, because you guys both talked about post-bacs after your bachelor's before going on to graduate school. And so my question is in particular how you were able to find the person that you wanted to do your post-bac with, reaching out, and then also just how influential that was in your career choices later on.
Danielle, you want to go first?
Sure. So when I was looking for a postbac, was a job listing that popped up on, I'm not even remembering, I feel like it was the AAS job register that I was applying for. But when I got that would have been like kind of starting right away. I just kind of threw myself into doing the CIERA REU. And to some extent, I feel like I just got lucky that somebody there had money to keep somebody there. Like I said, I really credit to some extent my luck was I wrote that into my application. So I told people that I was looking for that. I know some of the professors I had worked with knew that I was looking for that. So the particular one that I got, I felt a little bit like serendipity and right place, right time. But sort of reaching out to contacts and network has been really good for me, because a lot of post-bac sort of positions don't even necessarily get listed on, they don't get listed, and if somebody knows that you're looking for something, and people sometimes just create stuff. So just letting people know has been good.
Yeah, mine is fairly similar in that I got my post-bac entirely because I was in the right place at the right time. At my four-year school, it was a small four-year school in New York, and I was the only person there who was interested in astronomy, which means that the only astronomer there was very interested in me and helping me get connected with the other astronomers around New York City. And so when the post-baccalaureate program at Columbia started to come online, I had been in the second cohort, but the first cohort was extremely small. So really the second cohort was kind of like an extension of the first cohort. And they really were still trying to get it going. and didn't really have any astronomers to get to into the program. Meanwhile, I was about to finish my undergrad. I only had one semester left and like one more physics class left. And so it was kind of like lucky that I could just take my last class at Columbia and be a part of the program, but also get more research experience because I didn't have that much. And it was pretty necessary for me to be able to get into grad school to get some research experience. So yeah, I found it because I was lucky and I met the right people and said yes to a lot of things.
And I'll just chime in that I was actually also did a post-bac position between my undergrad and grad. And unlike those two cases, I actually applied to like the 4 jobs on the AAS job register for bachelor students and got interviews at 2 and took one and ended up doing a job observing out in Laramie, Wyoming for a year. And so I think there are actually some paths, but I would definitely agree that I think there's a lot more opportunities out there for kind of with networking.
Certainly now than there was 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say that I've hired a couple of people between undergrad and grad school recently. And, you know, while I think it's a lot more powerful if we did have a job register and that we put jobs up, the sad truth is that I didn't even think I wanted or was planning to hire somebody until I got an email from a colleague that said, hey, there's this great student I worked with that's looking for an experience between undergrad and grad. Do you have any need? And I'm like, I've got some extra grant funding. I could use this task. And that's how they got hired. And I think that happens because you will actively search for postdocs and grad students, but in the post-bac situation, one way to make sure that you take advantage of all resources available is to ask your REU mentors and other professors at your universities to let it be known that you're interested, because their networks are potentially going to hit some folks who have some funding and a need.
Okay, I want to take our next question is from the chat. And the question is, if you were to, this is for all the panelists, if you were to rewind to undergrad, what classes would you take as a physics or astronomy student that would be most useful for a non-academia career?
If by non-academia you mean industry, I would probably have, my school is actually best known for its business program. And I don't know exactly what classes would have been available because I wasn't paying attention at the time, but something along the lines of business intelligence, probably. And I think now there's probably a lot more offerings that would be relevant than there were back then, because that was kind of in this pre-data science era. But I think kind of like applied problem solving using numbers and programming, like anything kind of along those lines is what I would have chosen.
So just a quick, go ahead, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to echo what Patti just said. Apps, anything that applies the stuff that you learn to real world problems. Also, if you're specifically looking into like data science stuff, anything statistical, a lot of statistics classes. I would also take some classes in business. I guess it wouldn't be part of a physics or astronomy program, but it would help me understand more about what's going on around me as an employee of a place. Because there's a lot to being an employee that you don't understand as a grad student, that you only get from either, I guess, from business classes or from working somewhere.
So I agree with both those answers, but I would emphasize that physics is itself a very malleable degree, and an undergraduate physics degree is essentially learning how to problem solve. And it is sought after widely across many different industries. And if you want to take business or economics classes on top of your physics degree, feel free to do that to enrich yourself, as Nicholas was just saying. But in my experience, the physics degree there's a very wide swath of non-academic careers you can go to with just the physics degree. You don't need to take the economics of the business classes to make yourself attractive to a wide variety of industries and companies, from finance to straight up business to coding or industry or government labs. All those things are open to a physics degree. It's a very universal degree that is effectively teaching you how to problem solve. So that would be my answer to that.
Can I add to that as
Oh.
well? Part of the issue that I found with a lot of people who have physics degrees is they don't know how to market themselves like that. You know, like that I'm a professional problem solver. A lot of people who have physics degrees tend to think that like, oh, I have a physics degree, I could only do physics stuff from here on out, and it's hard to know how to translate that into a resume. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true. Having somebody help you through that is an industry always helps. The really quick thing that I'll say is I spent a lot of time avoiding classes where I had to do much writing in undergrad, and I regret that. I'm a decent writer, but I think I could have been better had I done more writing.
Yes, writing is like the hidden thing that is actually really helpful in so many different careers. Okay, I want to go back to our the verbal questions. Let me go to Northwestern from Stephanie.
Thanks, Aaron, and thank you all guys for sharing your experience and like what you've done with undergrad and grad school and stuff. I guess I specifically had a question for all of you guys. I know with undergraduate and graduate schools, you learn a lot of skills. So in your guys' experiences that you've had, what would you say would be like the top 5 skills that you learned from both undergrad and then grad school that were directly applicable to like your industry careers, or like before when you were trying to apply to industry careers, or like now that you're working at these companies?
Top 5 skills that's a challenging one. I would say that the top skill for me obviously was programming. But if I were to get more specific than that, it would be like collaborative programming and like the whole code review process and development process for like team-based development. I think that's something that I learned in grad school, but to a limited extent. It really kind of was driven home when I did the Google Summer of Code program. But I think that's becoming more and more common in academic research. And then other than that, I would emphasize communications. I think that was developed in a lot of different ways, but mostly just through having to give research presentations constantly and giving them to a variety of audiences and volunteering to like present to people who are maybe new to a subject or external audiences. So you have to like present at very basic levels and higher levels. That's definitely a skill that will be valuable throughout your life, I'm sure, no matter what you do. I'll stop there. I could probably go on for other skills, but want to give other people.
So I'll jump in quickly and I'll start by saying that anything I say, or probably any of the panelists, these are all our own opinions, and you have to take them with a grain of salt and decide how you want to ingest it, because everybody has different experiences, knowledge. Obviously, 1 second, my daughter wants me to turn on her show. There we go. And I could have a different opinion than other panelists and everybody, and I'm just going to say, to me, the most important thing about graduate school is you're learning what you want to do. First and foremost, recognize that going to graduate school is itself a sacrifice. You're going to work very hard. It's going to take a number of years, and it's potentially going to be the worst financial decision you've ever made, because while you're in graduate school, you're not making the salary you'd make in a job somewhere else. And you have to think about all those things. And so what I always tell the students that I work with is, okay, if you think that what you want to do requires that PhD to do it, that's a good reason to go to graduate school, and you go there and you start working on the research to see if that's really what you want to do, and that you recognize that you're there because you need to be there for what you want to do. And if what you want to do changes, you act appropriately and act accordingly. So to me, the most important skill you learn in graduate school is, what is it that I want to do? And you could learn that you want to stay in academia. You could learn you want to go to industry. You could be whatever it is that you're trying to learn. But you are in graduate school, in my opinion, to figure out what it is you want to do with that PhD once you finish. And that's the most important skill I think I would take away from it. The other one is just learning how to be an independent thinker. That's what PhDs are known for. That's what companies and industry, finance, everybody wants a PhD because they're people that can come up with a problem, come up with a way to solve it, and then go ahead and do that. And so it's learning that process of transitioning from your first year when your advisor is giving you projects and saying, you do these 10 analysis tasks and in 2 years you'll write a paper, to 3 years into your PhD when you're coming up with your own projects, you're doing it all yourself and you're just letting your advisor know what's going on, and they really don't even know what you're doing for the most part. So it's those two things. It's deciding what you want to do and learning how to become an independent thinker and come up with problems yourself, and then more importantly, come up with plans of how to solve those problems.
Okay, let me, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. You want to say something, or?
I was just going to go on to the next question, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I mean, I guess I'm not going to say too much different from what Patti said before. Certainly programming, because that's my job. That's the most important skill that I learned. But aside from that, you know, when you're meeting with your advisor every day or every week or however often you meet with your advisor, you're communicating complex ideas to somebody else, and that skill is something that I have to do every day on the job, trying to talk to my manager or products or whatever, like the thing that I'm trying to work on, they need to know about it. And they're not going to have the context that I have, so I have to bring that context to them. So having that practice certainly was valuable. The capability to take a large problem and break it down on your own and work on the small parts, again, on your own, and produce something valuable that's relevant to the goal that you started out with. Like, it seems like a obvious thing, but that's a thing that you learn from practice. And that's the thing that I learned from grad school. How to learn on my own. I mean, I'm not happy to say that I spent a lot of time by myself in grad school trying to figure out what I'm going to do. But because I did that, it became a skill that I learned, and I know now how to teach myself whatever I want by finding documentation, by finding papers, by finding whatever. Like it's my first instinct now to go looking for a thing that I want. And then, again, and I guess this is specific to astronomy, but I learned a lot about how to talk to the public from doing planetarium shows. There was a couple of years I did a planetarium show at least every month, if not every other week. And the people coming in, you have no idea what they know. And you have only a vague idea of what they want to hear, but you still have something you want to talk about, and you have to make sure they're going to understand what you're talking about. And so, like, if they're looking at the projection and they see like a molecular cloud, they don't know what a molecular cloud is, but it could still be useful for them to know what it is, what it does, without them knowing about like the density of the cloud or whatever the gas fraction is, or any of the things that astronomers might care about. It's, you know, learning to know your audience. Came from grad school.
Thank you. Now let me go to Lily Robinthal, who has her hand raised.
Hi, yeah, thank you. A few of you mentioned things about non-faculty research or academic positions. What do those generally look like, and how do you find them?
So I can speak quickly to that. So NASA has about $500 million a year that goes, for example, to research for just funding scientists. And planetary science, for example, is one field where people can work for what they call soft money research firms or universities and just propose to NASA grants or NSF grants to pay for their salaries. And so I direct the center of about 75 people who all bring in their salaries by writing grants every year. And they're able to do their research. And these are people who, some of the most senior ones are well known in the field. They're even more respected than many, if not all, the faculty in our department in terms of their research expertise. And they just decide that that's the career they want to take. They want to do research. They want the flexibility of only doing research, and they propose writing these proposals to places that have calls that are public for anyone to propose to, like NASA or the NSF. The downside to that is it's a bit of a risky situation, in that if you don't bring in enough grants in one given year, you don't get your full salary. And so there are pros and cons. You get a lot of flexibility, but there's a risk associated with your ability to consistently bring in your salary. And I have a lot of respect for my colleagues who have been doing that for 20 plus years and raising families in that environment. But that is an option. You can also do research at NASA centers, for example, as a civil servant, where you have a guaranteed salary and your job is just to do research, or work at a place like Applied Physics Lab, Jet Propulsion Lab, or Lincoln Labs, a little bit away from NASA work, but there are other government labs and centers where you can just be a researcher. But I'll let the other panelists answer as well.
It's less common, but there certainly are a lot of strict research opportunities in industry as well. If you think about places like Microsoft Research, SpaceX, a lot of big companies in particular that have those kind of resources are investing strictly in kind of basic research, and people who are, it's their job to find new opportunities and publish papers and kind of collaborate with academics. I'm not super familiar with specific opportunities, but they're definitely out there.
Thank you so much.
Let me go to Chloe from Northwestern for the next question.
I have a question for Professor Hayes. Do you have any advice for finding I don't know, any sort of the way of with the goal of becoming a professor? Any advice to getting there?
Well, I'll let the other folks online answer this one as well, because we all have our different advice for it. But I will say that finding something you love doing and doing the research on that is the most important thing. And for me, at least, it was recognizing that there is, at least in my subfield, there are more applicants than there are positions. And at some level, it is literally luck. You have to be good enough to make the long list, but there's a lot of people that are good enough to make the long list for the faculty positions. And once you're on that list, all of a sudden ancillary effects like what's the best research area we want to fill this gap in our department? How does it fit to our demographics? How does it fit to any number of things that come up, because you have 30 people that are equally well qualified for the position. And so recognizing that is important, and knowing that there are other ways to do the research, even if you don't end up as a faculty member. With that said, I would never tell someone who wants to be a faculty member not to shoot for it, not to try, not to apply, but just recognizing that that's what you're getting yourself into, and that there are places where you can do the same kind of research and also have a rewarding career. So my best advice is just find something you're passionate about and keep doing the research and publishing the papers on it. And that would be the advice I'd give for the faculty path.
Maybe I'll give a little addition to this. And I'm going to tie in a question that we had from the chat, which was, why did you decide to do a postdoc and how do you find it helpful? So first of all, my position is as a research faculty, so it's slightly different. It's actually not tenured, but it has the title of faculty in there. So it's slightly different, but I agree with what Alex said 100%. It has a lot to do with luck. It has a lot to do with kind of where you might fit in certain universities and how you can make your case that you would fit there. But to give a little bit more information about how the path normally works is you will go to grad school, you come out with a PhD, and very few people after grad school get a faculty position right there, right out of grad school. That's very uncommon these days. What is most common is that you go on for a postdoc. And so to answer the question of why you might decide to do a postdoc is you love research, you really want to continue in academia, but you're not yet at a level where you can be competitive for a faculty position. So you might do a postdoc, and that is a postdoc is a research, like almost fully research position that is a great. I found it to be very fun most of the time, and lots of people will do multiple postdocs. So it's normally a few-year position at one place. You might have another postdoc at another place, and then eventually you might apply to get a faculty position. And so that's what usually the job route looks like. I don't know if Alex, you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, that something else to keep in mind is that life is important and your personal life is important. And in my because I understood all of this when I went to look for my faculty positions, and everyone does their own thing, but I made a deal with my wife at the time. We had our first child while I was in graduate school, and then before I even applied for postdocs, I made a deal with her that I would end up being allowed to try 2 different postdocs, and if I didn't get my faculty position after the second, we were gonna move on to something different, just because I didn't want to fall into the position of doing postdoc after postdoc after postdoc, dragging both her and the 2-body problem and my young children around. And so just keeping into view that there's a work-life balance and something to keep that important and in mind as well. I was very lucky. It just turned out that the position that fit the research I did opened up. In fact, I wasn't even the first choice for my position. It's the first choice went to a different school, and then that person gets free drinks from me at the bar every conference I see her for the rest of her lives. So there is this element of luck, and we have to keep in mind that that work-life balance is important.
Alex, I want to thank you for bringing that up, because I wanted to close with a question that's exactly what you're just talking about. I want to respect everyone's time, because I did say that we would end at 4 o'clock Central, and we're almost there. But I want to ask one final question for all the panelists to just describe a little bit about the work-life balance that you're experiencing right now. And maybe, if you want, a little bit about how this has changed over the years and how it's been treating you.
I can start. I think right now is a little tough because times are not normal. But honestly, things haven't changed that much for me, working from home full time for the past, what has it been, like 5 months now? Mainly because I don't have kids. I think I've seen a lot of my colleagues who have kids and are doing double duty struggle. But in general, I felt like after grad school, where I was kind of burnt out, work-life balance improved dramatically, moving to industry. And also my self-esteem actually went up a lot. I felt like I didn't have imposter syndrome in the same way. And I attribute that a lot to having a really good manager, a really good people manager whose job it was to make sure I was doing the best I could. In general, I think in the field of data science, when you're in any field where it's really competitive, companies are willing to invest in making you happy. And there's a lot of really great vacation policies out there, a lot of, unlimited vacation policies out there. We're especially right now getting repeated encouragement to remember to take our vacation because everybody's kind of just stuck at home. So in general, I think work-life balance is great for me, but I also know if you're at a startup, it can be the complete opposite. So it's going to vary a lot from person to person.
Yeah, I can jump in, and I'll echo a lot of what you say. I am going to caveat that if a company ever tells you that it has an unlimited vacation day policy, take that with a huge grain of salt. And I would rather have something that's a little bit more defined. But that's how I am. I tend to the jobs that I gravitate towards are not that startup life of working 24/7. That's not what I want to do with my time. I work to support having a life that I like. I sometimes still feel like I'm trying to figure out what life I do like, but that's why I'm working. So I also, I don't have kids, but I am not available 24/7. I turn off my computer and don't talk with people about work at night. So that has worked out for me with both my last job and this job.
I can talk about my experience. Currently, I have the best work-life balance that I've ever had in my entire career. I start work at 9, sometimes 9:30, because I'm eating breakfast with my family, and then I have a hard stop at 5. And my company has respected that since I started, and since COVID, I usually just work on Mondays through Wednesdays. I told them I can work 9 to 12 guaranteed, and then after that, I got to take care of my kids. So if he's asleep, I'll work, but otherwise I'm not available for certain. And then Thursdays and Fridays, I just do my normal hours. But they've never asked me to do more than 40 a week, and I've never done more than 40 a week for them. And actually, so Danielle, you said the thing about unlimited paid time off, and I get that, and I'm on the same page, but I do have unlimited PTO. However, they actually strongly encourage me to take at least 4 weeks off a year. And I've probably done about that already, and I'm going to do more when I move. And they no questions asked. I have been in a position before where I did have unlimited PTO and it was abused against me, not for me, and so that sucked. But yeah, before this at Starbucks, it was like 3 weeks vacation, but if I wanted to take more time off, my manager was cool. He didn't really care as long as I did my work. Work-life balance there was still pretty good, mostly because I had to be out at 5 to get my kid from daycare. And I wouldn't really do too much weekend work, if ever. And then before that, when I was teaching, I was fresh out of grad school, so I still had my grad school work ethic, which meant I worked way too much, like way too much. Like when I first started teaching, I was working until like 2 in the morning sometimes, answering students' questions, preparing curriculum. I think I maybe took a handful of days off a year because I was teaching classes I couldn't be absent. And then even when my son was born, like I took 2 weeks off, and I only got that second week because someone was doing me a favor of taking over my class for me. So it certainly varies with where you go, but I've been very lucky to just only have to do 40 hours a week since I started this job.
So I'll just throw a couple comments in real quick because I know we all have to leave. I'll say that there are pros and cons for, say, for example, academia versus industry. And in academia, you have extreme flexibility. I work when I want. If I don't have to teach a class at a given time, I can go off and take my kid to a hockey game or school. I can kind of be the master of my own schedule. But having a decent work-life balance in that environment requires extreme strength of will, because you can always just be working and there's always something to do. And for example, when I first started as a faculty member, I literally didn't sleep 2 nights a week. I would just work through the night 2 nights a week to stay on top of everything. And you're in charge of deciding how many things you say yes to. And perhaps the most important thing you have to learn when you're doing your independent research program, when you're running your group, is when to say no and how to say no. It's so easy to say yes to everything and get involved with way too many projects. And so it took me a couple of years to learn how to do that. And now I have a much more sane work-life balance, although I will say I'm basically going crazy right now because I have 4 kids and very limited childcare, but that's a moment of our times right now. The reason I gave you that background is that if you have extreme strength of will and you're willing to do it, there's a lot of flexibility to the academic lifestyle. When I worked in industry, I literally worked in a safe. I worked in a reverse engineering lab. We built instruments that were all classified. And so I had to go through 2 different safe rooms to get into my work. And I wasn't allowed to bring my work home. And that was a very different environment, right? I went to work at 7 or 8 in the morning. I left work at 3:30 or 4. And I couldn't even think about work outside of work. I couldn't check email. I couldn't do anything. And that was a very different environment. And so there's a lot less flexibility there in terms of you have a certain number of vacation days off. You have to be at work from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. or 9 to 5, whatever those hours are. But once you're out of work, you're out of work. Whereas in academia, you're kind of always on that quasi edge of either being at work or not being at work. And you have to have the strength of will to define which is which.
Okay, I think that wraps up our panel. Let me thank all of our panelists again for joining us. This was really great having you. And thank you to everyone who asked questions. I apologize, we didn't make it through all the questions, but, and so there's a lot of, great things for you all to discuss with your own advisors and your own network. But I want to thank everyone for joining us, and I wish you all the best of luck in your career paths.